The debate that changed everything. For years, Joe Biden had been one of the closest witnesses to the modern American presidency. She was not merely the First Lady. She was a trusted advisor, a campaign surrogate, a defender of her husband, and one of the few people who saw both the public and private sides of Joe Biden's political life. But according to her memoir, View from the East Wing, one night changed everything. The presidential debate of June 2024. To millions of Americans watching on television, the debate was shocking. Joe Biden appeared tired. His voice was weak. His answers often lacked energy. Several moments quickly went viral across social media. Within hours, political commentators, journalists, donors, and elected officials began asking the same question. Could Joe Biden still win? Inside the White House, however, the situation was even more dramatic than the public realized. Joe Biden describes watching the debate unfold with growing concern. Like many Americans, she immediately sensed that something had gone terribly wrong. The performance was not simply disappointing, it felt alarming. According to accounts discussed in the memoir, there were moments when she feared her husband might be experiencing a serious medical issue. The possibility of a stroke crossed her mind. That fear would become one of the most discussed revelations from the book. For months after the debate, speculation dominated American politics. Critics argue that the White House had hidden signs of Biden's decline. Supporters insisted that one bad debate should not define an entire presidency. The country became deeply divided, yet behind closed doors, even some allies of the president were struggling to understand what had happened. The debate did not simply create a media controversy, it triggered a political crisis. Within days, pressure began mounting inside the Democratic Party. Major donors expressed concern. Campaign strategists worried about polling numbers. Prominent Democrats started discussing scenarios that had once seemed impossible. For years, Joe Biden had been the uncontested leader of the party. Now, some members openly questioned whether he should remain the nominee. Jill Biden recalls how quickly the atmosphere changed. People who had publicly supported the president suddenly became nervous. Conversations became more tense. Questions became more direct. The confidence that had existed before the debate was beginning to disappear. Perhaps the most painful aspect was the realization that the criticism was not coming only from political opponents. It was coming from Democrats themselves, friends, allies, supporters, people who had worked alongside Biden for years. As concern spread through Washington, the White House entered one of the most turbulent periods of the administration. Every public appearance was analyzed. Every speech was scrutinized. Every interview generated headlines. The debate had become more than a single event. It had become a symbol of uncertainty, a symbol of political vulnerability, and a symbol of a question that many Americans were asking. Was the president still capable of serving another 4 years? The memoir suggests that these questions weighed heavily on the Biden family, not simply because of politics, but because they touched something personal. For Jill Biden, the criticism was directed not only at the president, it was directed at her husband, a man she had spent decades supporting through personal tragedies, political defeats, and historic victories. As pressure continued to grow, the Democratic Party faced a reality it has spent years trying to avoid. The 2024 election was approaching rapidly. Poll numbers were becoming increasingly concerning, and the debate had fundamentally altered the political landscape. What followed would become one of the most dramatic periods in modern American political history because the crisis sparked by a single debate was only beginning, and soon decisions would have to be made that could determine the future of an entire political party. The crisis inside the Democratic Party. If the debate marked the beginning of the crisis, the weeks that followed became a struggle for survival. According to Joe Biden's memoir, the atmosphere inside Democratic circles changed almost overnight. The party was no longer focused solely on defeating Donald Trump. Instead, it found itself consumed by a different question. What should happen to Joe Biden? For months, Democratic leaders had publicly projected unity. Disagreements existed, but they largely remained behind closed doors. After the debate, that changed. Concerns that had once been whispered became public conversations. Strategists worried about swing states. Donors questioned the campaign's path forward. Political allies debated whether remaining in the race posed a greater risk than stepping aside. The uncertainty spread quickly. Every day brought new headlines. Every statement was dissected. Every rumor generated speculation. The White House found itself at the center of a political storm. Jill Biden's memoir portrays this period as one of extraordinary pressure. Not only was her husband facing criticism from opponents, but he was also confronting doubts from within his own party. For a president who had spent decades building relationships throughout Washington, the experience was deeply painful. Yet, the crisis was not only about Joe Biden, it was also about the future leadership of the Democratic Party. As discussions intensified, attention increasingly shifted toward Vice President Kamala Harris. Many Democrats viewed her as the most obvious successor. Others worried about the political risks of a sudden transition. The debate over the future of the ticket became one of the defining stories of the election cycle. The memoir suggests there were moments of tension surrounding how quickly endorsements and decisions should occur. These discussions reflected a larger struggle taking place within the party. Who would lead? Who would unite Democrats? And who would have the best chance of defeating Trump? Eventually, the pressure reached a point where Joe Biden made the decision that reshaped the election. He stepped aside. The decision stunned many Americans. For decades, presidential candidates who secured their party's nomination rarely abandoned the race voluntarily. Yet Biden concluded that the interests of the party and the country required a different path. The memoir presents this choice not as an act of defeat, but as a painful act of responsibility. Whether Americans agree with that interpretation remains a matter of debate, but there is little doubt that the decision altered the course of the election. Looking back, Joe Biden's memoir offers something many political books struggle to provide, a personal perspective on a historic moment. The book is not merely about campaign strategy, it is about uncertainty, family, loyalty, pressure, and the human side of political power. For years, historians will continue debating the political consequences of the 2024 campaign. They will analyze polling data, electoral maps, and strategic decisions. But memoirs, like View from the East Wing, provide a different kind of record. They reveal what the participants themselves felt while events were unfolding. And perhaps that is why the book has attracted so much attention, not because it exposes a shocking conspiracy, not because it reveals a hidden scandal, but because it opens a window into one of the most consequential political crises of the 21st century, a crisis that began on a debate stage and ultimately changed the future of American politics